They tell you the law is a shield. For 82 years I believed that. I believed it the day I enlisted, and I believed it the day I came home, carrying a piece of shrapnel in my hip that sang a little song whenever the weather turned cold. My life became small after that. A small house, a small pension, a small garden where I grew tomatoes that my granddaughter, Lily, said tasted like sunshine. That was my world. Sunshine and tomatoes and the sound of Lily's laughter. Until the morning I backed my old truck into a brand new Mercedes in the grocery store parking lot. It was a scratch, a hairline fracture in the clear coat. I got out, hat in hand, ready to do the right thing. But the man who stepped out of that Mercedes wasn't interested in the right thing. He was young. His suit probably cost more than my truck. He looked at my trembling hands, at my worn-out boots, and he didn't see a man. He saw a target. He started filming me with his phone, and his voice was loud, sharp, meant to draw a crowd. "Look at this," he laughed. "A relic. Probably fought in a war we should have lost. Can't even drive. Can't even afford to look at my car." He called me a leech, a waste of tax money. He said men like me were the reason the country was weak. And he kept laughing. Cold, easy laugh. People stood and watched. No one said a word. I just stood there, feeling the shrapnel in my hip start to burn. I thought that was the end of it. But his father was a general. A man with influence, with a name that carried weight. They didn't want my insurance. They wanted a lesson. They sued me for damages that were 10 times the value of the scratch. They said I was a menace, a reckless elderly driver who should have his license revoked. The first paper arrived on a Tuesday. I read the word defendant and felt the floor drop out from under me. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I couldn't afford to lose. All I could think about was Lily. I'm raising her, you see. Her parents are gone. If I lost my license, if they took my pension, I'd lose her too. The courtroom was a cathedral of cold marble and polished wood. I felt like an ant crawling across the floor. The general sat in the front row, ramrod straight, medals on his chest, looking at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. His son sat beside him, the same smirk on his face, whispering to his father and pointing at me. The judge was a woman named Coleridge. She had the kind of face that looked carved from ice. She didn't look at me when I walked in. She didn't look at me when I stood to explain. She just stared at the papers, sighed like she was bored, and asked, "Is the defendant even competent to be here?" The lawyer for the general, a man with a perfect haircut, painted a picture of me.
À danger.
A burden. A stubborn old man clogging up the system. When I tried to speak, to tell them about the scratch, about the mockery, the judge cut me off. "We're not here for your feelings," she said. "We're here for the facts." And every time I opened my mouth, she looked at me with this thin, impatient smile, as if watching a child stumble through a recital. The general's son was called to the stand. He lied. He said I was speeding, that I was drunk, that I screamed obscenities at him. He told the story with a straight face, and the judge nodded along, her pen tapping against the bench. I saw the general lean back, a small, satisfied nod. They were going to take everything. My truck, my license, my Lily. Then it was my turn. They asked me to state my name and my service record. I told them. I told them about the platoon I was in, the winter of '65, the names of the men I carried. The lawyer for the general interrupted. "Objection, Your Honor. Irrelevant and self-serving." The judge sustained it. She leaned forward, that icy gaze finally fixing on me, and she said, "This court will not be a theater for your nostalgia, Mr. Harlow. Stick to the facts of the collision, or I will hold you in contempt." That was the moment the room went quiet, because I didn't sit down. I stood there, and I reached into the pocket of my old coat. It was a crumpled piece of paper, a letter. "With respect, Your Honor," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "I am sticking to the facts. The fact is, I was an infantryman. The fact is, I was at Kisan. And the fact is, I remember faces. I remember the men who had my back, and I remember the ones who didn't." I held up the letter. "This is a letter from my commanding officer. It was written 60 years ago. It details a rescue I performed under fire. The man I pulled out of that foxhole was General Whitmore, the father of the plaintiff. I turned and looked at the general. His face, which had been so proud, so imperious, had gone the color of ash. His son looked at him, confused. "He knows me," I said, my voice breaking. "He knows I don't lie. He knows who I am." I faced the judge again, and for the first time I saw her pen stop tapping. "You said this wasn't a theater for my nostalgia. But it seems it is a theater. A theater for a man who once called me his brother, now letting his son mock me in a parking lot and lie in a courtroom to take the last thing I have. You want facts? There's the fact. There's his face. Ask him if he remembers the man who carried him through the mud while he was screaming for his mother." The silence was absolute. The judge stared at the general, who could not meet her eyes. Her expression shifted. The ice didn't melt, but it cracked. She turned to the general's son. She dismissed the entire case with prejudice. She looked at the young man, at his expensive suit, at his father, and her voice was low, like a winter wind. She said the court would not be used to settle a debt of honor by those who had none. And then, as the general sat there, stripped of his rank in that moment, stripped of his story, his son turned to him, desperate. And I saw the general reach out. The man who mocked me, the rich general's son, asked for my forgiveness before they helped him from the courtroom.